GM all day long.
That's right. Timeless.
So I guess we'll get started when Jared, whenever you're ready with the setup. Just a reminder, we have a sort of a special setup here where we are broadcasting live to YouTube, and we are also doing a live Twitter broadcast as well as the space. So it's like a triple threat.
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces. Just give me 1 second. All right, everyone. Welcome to the discussion today. I'm actually pretty sick today, so luckily I'm going to be handing off most of this conversation to our new contributor to the DeFi Insider show podcast. That's Netrum. He's going to be kind of running the show today. So with that, we're also joined by North and Dog from Ramses. And Ramses is a DeFi protocol that builds on the principles of Solidly. They foster a community-centric and highly decentralized, efficient platform. And Ramses is operating on Arbitrum at the moment. And yeah. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to go lie down.
Thank you.
Thanks for the intro, Jared.
Feel better.
Thanks for the intro. Yeah. Okay, so thanks, Doug. Thanks, Nod, for having here. Let's start with the audience. They're still coming, but let's start easy and simple. Let's talk about what's Ramses.
All right. GM, everybody. Ramses is one way you could describe Ramses as liquidity bootstrapping protocol. The longer answer is it's built from what was originally, going back almost a couple years now, the Solidly innovation that Andre Cronje brought to market, starting on Phantom, which essentially was a way to a more efficient DEX by separating out the trading fees away from LPs and giving those to VNFT voters that are aligned with the protocol, and then rewarding the LPs on the LP side with native token emissions, in our case RAM. And that has a number of different interesting dynamics that play out different than a traditional deck, but that's the kind of the short of it. And most recently, I think one of the more compelling and kind of interesting variables that we've just introduced is Ramses CL, which is taking the kind of technical superiority of concentrated liquidity from Uniswap v3, and then attaching to that our bribe infrastructure, and we can go deeper into that. But really interesting dynamic, early stages, seeing how that plays out in essentially a competitive farming scenario, which as LPs compete to provide the tightest and most efficient bands to where the trading is going to take place, so that they can, in the only way that they can earn fees, it sets off this competition that is unlike what we've seen before, and we're really excited about what that could mean. We could talk more about that. Anything you'd add, Dog?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I'd say, yeah. I mean, you're better at explaining it than I am. I would just say that, hopping off what North said, that the contrary liquidity, I think the biggest thing is that, there's contrary liquidity all around. I think there's multiple protocols doing it. The rewarder and where exactly, how we're able to distribute the rewards is actually where it's done differently. So a lot of people do not know this, but for example, one of the biggest contrary liquidity providers that isn't Uniswap is Algebra, and they have kind of their own built-in farms and stuff that you can use, but there's kind of some like mathematical flaws that are built into it that in typical dev fashion, they're not bugs, they're features, so they became part of the core features. So we didn't want to include any of these like mathematical flaws or bugs, so what we did is we essentially just took Unity 3, which is battle tested, there's no bugs in it, and we actually just kind of built off of it. So our actual pools in Unity 3 as a whole, like our actual core, we modified the code. It's mainly the same logic as far as like the swaps and like the pools and all that, but it communicates effortlessly with our gauges. So like the boosts are kind of caked into the actual pool. So the ABIs are a little different, things like that. I guess I can go on forever, but long story short, I believe we took something that was missing in the market with mathematically sound farming built into contrary liquidity, and we paired that with the VU33 model.
Okay, thanks. Let's go back a step here. Tell us why Ramses? That's my first why. But my second why is why Arbitrum? So what's behind Ramses? Why Egyptian theme? What's the history there?
Okay, so the actual theme and stuff, like that is 100% North. North came up with the name. I think the Egyptian theme, we just kind of we really liked it. I forget what the exact reason was, but we were kind of going like, oh, we should do like an Egyptian type theme. And North kind of came into Discord and posted this 5,000 word dissertation on why we should be Ramses, and he has all these pictures and crazy explanation, and then we're all just yeah, that's great. Let's go with that. But I can let him speak more on why.
No, it was the dissertation. That was the whole thing. No, it's a rich area. It's just this time of prosperity, right? One of the first superpowers, and what was the breadbasket of the world at the time, with the Nile and kind of geopolitically where they were positioned away from enemies and different things. They had to cross the desert to get to them. And so and it's a rich space that's fun, and kind of speaks to this, kind of the idea of a pharaoh and prosperity and things like that. So that's kind of what set us off down that path. And I think, why the protocol itself, we both shared a little bit about that, but we were, as a team, we were all kind of bonded in this furnace of challenges going back a couple of years where, things with the solidly V1 on Phantom just, got wrecked, and it was a really tough situation for a lot of people, ourselves included. But we really wanted to see the experiment and the innovation play out. And so that just kept us really tight to it, kept us deep into every inch of the mechanism, trying to sort it out. Dog played a big role over the last, year plus of, together with others, finding vulnerabilities, figuring out how to patch them, improving the system. And ultimately, you fast forward, we wanted a shot to do it the way that we want to, run a protocol and run a project in the kind of community that we want to have fun with and build with. And that leads us to Arbitrum, which, was just from the very beginning, just to us, the most DeFi-centric L2. And I think that was a lot of the drive. Obviously, there's also a lot of momentum coming out with the airdrop and then just some of the interactions with other protocols. We just felt like that was where we wanted to be.
Hey, just a quick question on that. So DeFi-centric L2, that makes sense. I guess I would be curious, like, what your thoughts are on optimism, and did you guys ponder that a lot? And then in sort of as a follow-up, did you guys consider going on other chains like Avalanche, Solana, so on? And how did you sort of make the decision between other chains versus an L2?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak to that. Essentially, I think we chose Arbitrum mainly because the actual, experience of using Arbitrum is crazy. I think the first time anyone ever uses Arbitrum, they're kind of shocked at how quickly, the finality and all the block times are. I wouldn't get into all the technical details of why it's like that, but essentially, all these other chains at the time, I think one of the biggest things is we just wanted something that was very fluid, very smooth, and Arbitrum really fit that narrative where, every time I've used Arbitrum, I'm like, wow, this is super nice, and I've never had issues with the actual, transactions going through and things like that, and it's relatively cheap. So, we come from, if you come from mainnet, transactions. I remember vividly doing one multi-sig transaction would be $300 for a batch transaction, and then we come to Arbitrum and it's 60 cents. So it's just that alone is wow. You retain the security of the mainnet layer. I think, which is one of the most important things, is maintaining the integrity and security of the actual platform. So Arbitrum and Optimism, are the two biggest layer 2 roll-ups for Ethereum, and I think we honestly didn't look into going to other chains. I think we were really just dead set on Arbitrum because it was missing, there wasn't really any B33 exchange that existed on Arbitrum at the time that I think was worth pursuing. So we saw a market need, and we saw the opportunity show up, so we decided, hey, let's go to Arbitrum. Whereas Optimism, Velodrome's already there, and they're friends of ours, and it didn't really seem like there was a reason to compete with them. Whereas why not bring this sort of innovation to Arbitrum where it's really needed versus going to a saturated market? But unfortunately, as we came here, I think 15 others came here, and it just kind of I don't know, saturated us worse than we thought. But I think it's fine as far as people really saw the benefit of the model. I think it's imitation is the best sort of flattery.
Yeah, and I'd say maybe in addition to Velodrome really setting up a nice having a nice setup on Optimism and really having things cranking there. Then you look at B&B, which is just a different beast and wasn't really within our kind of our interest set. And we also had Dr. Liquid and team crushing it there and really off to the races with Thena. And so then you look at Base. Well, Base, there's a much longer story there, but it's of course early. And then ZK Sync, even that, while there's a lot of things that are attractive about that, also for our timing and how we're thinking about things and wanting to come into existing liquidity depth and so forth and some maturity, that didn't match where ZK Sync was at the time, or even quite yet at this point, although growing fast. So that kind of combined with just our initial attraction and what we'd experienced individually, interacting on Arbitrum, plus the DeFi, tone to everything we'd experienced, that made it a really easy choice.
Makes sense. I think next we're going to want to move to concentrated liquidity. But before we do, since we're still on the Arbitrum section of this discussion, just curious, can you tell us a little bit how you view like the competitive landscape in terms of dexes on Arbitrum? So like the uni model versus, but not necessarily like the model, but like more like the market share and how things are sort of playing out and between Uniswap and Liquidity Book and Camelot and so on, and maybe a little bit how you see that evolving.
I think honestly, it's like the saying where it's like, Arbitrum is this weird scenario where this town is big enough for all of us. Like there is so much volume and liquidity here and interactions, and the chain's just starting to grow. I think we're at the very beginning of its true like exponential growth. People are already just starting to notice like Arbitrum is really off to the races, and I think there's plenty of space for multiple dexes and all that. But as far as a competition goes, we ultimately, yes, they're all dexes, and we are all dexes, but we all approach it from a different angle. So everyone's going to kind of, as far as participating in the actual protocol, people have their own preferences and what they want to deal with. So I think ultimately there's not much overlap with that. I don't think there's too much like our users versus people who are using other dexes. I don't think there's too much of they're not comparing it too much. Whereas I think when it comes to like actual legitimate swapping and aggregating, that's where like the real overlap is with all these dexes. It's because everyone's fighting for the same market share on swaps. So ultimately, that always comes down to, who has the most efficient and lowest slippage swaps, and fees taking account to that, but ultimately slippage is the most important thing. So that's why we went to concentrated liquidity. Maybe owns the volume on every chain they're on, and for good reason. I mean, concentrated liquidity is so much more efficient than the traditional UniV2 model, or even like a stable swap curve that we're used to. So we decided, hey, like why go with some other, I guess, rendition of it? Because a lot of these other concentrated liquidity models were simply just made because Uniswap was under a business license. Like you really could not fork it and not be kind of infringing on their intellectual property. And so once April 1st came around and that Bizzle license was kind of gone, we saw the opportunity and we decided, hey, like let's take this battle tested already. I guess the math and logic within UniV3 is so insanely good. I think people overlook how brilliant and advanced Uniswap themselves are. Like the team is just so crazy good that why even try to think you can build something better than them as far as like the math and logic goes. So we decided, hey, let's take something that's already battle tested and great. Let's try and make it fit our model and try to improve on it where we can. So UniV3 is the most gas efficient out of all the concentrated liquidity models, and I think that itself is already means a lot, especially when there's a high volume of trades and stuff. And a lot of people they're comparing right now in the bear market as far as concentrated liquidity providers go, but what they don't realize is gas efficiency is going to be the most important thing when the bull market comes around and gas prices are multiple times what they are now, because then it gets accentuated, and those who have lower gas costs are going to be routed more often. And that's why we thought more long term rather than maybe this other one has like something that's slightly better as far as during the bear market, but does it really scale? No, they don't scale. And none of them have actually been tried in the bull market, whereas UniV3 has actually gone through the bull market, survived through the bear as well. It really is just fundamentally the best that's out there. Ultimately, I don't think anyone holds water to it. I don't think there's really any other concentrated liquidity provider that does it as well as them, even though there are different I guess innovations that have come to concentrated liquidity. Ultimately, it's people sometimes in life, it's not necessarily the most innovative that will work. It's more so what is the most trustworthy, what is the most battle tested, what are people comfortable using. I think everyone's comfortable using Uniswap. So I mean, even on top of that, we use their permit model. So if you approved a token to Uniswap's, if you've used UniV3 and you've approved token there, you can actually use that on our DEX. So we inherit that. So if you're approved, you approve to Uniswap and their V3 on Arbitrum when you go to use our DEX. So you're actually not giving any sort of like approval to any sketchy contracts or things like that. So if you trust Uniswap, you should trust approving your token to us. Essentially, it's the same thing when you use the permit model. So we want to inherit a lot of their like security and innate battle tested models. But I always just ramble on about this stuff. But once again, long story short, I don't think anyone holds water UniV3, and I don't think anyone will anytime soon.
Thanks, Doug. JF, you wanted to another question? We moved to concentrated liquidity. I think Doug just did a really nice intro, I would say, for all of those that are listening us. We're talking with Ramses. Ramses is a DEX on Arbitrum, and we are going to be touching a few things about them. JF?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the next, your next question was sort of answered, right? Like explanation of concentrated liquidity. So I mean, I was curious after that to know, and maybe you've already answered it, but how do you see the UniV3, the concentrated liquidity model? Like, do you see that evolving at all, or do you sort of think we've like reached sort of like peak optimal form? And yeah, I don't mean to be redundant. Maybe you sort of meant that already, but maybe you can confirm.
No, it'll get better. I mean, I think there's a V4 right around the corner. I mean, V3 is literally years old by now, which I think people are just now like, oh, concentrated liquidity is so great. It's like, they've done this for years. Like, it's been out for years. I think people are just starting to pick up on it, and they're way ahead of the curve. Like, the V4 will come, I guarantee it. And whether it's V3.5 or a V4, there are a lot of things that can be added to, like, kind of like view it as like UniV1 to V2. I think that's what V3 to V4 is going to be like. It's not going to be something substantially different as far as the actual like underlying way the model works, but I think there's going to be a lot of improvements and kind of like making it more adaptable to different things. Because ultimately, Uniswap, they've always kind of been a public good, and a lot of people fork their stuff. Like, that's simply the fact that they're so commonly forked and used. It's like they're essentially a public good. I think whatever their next iteration is going to be a very improved form of like the order book, because ultimately, concentrated liquidity is just mimicking a centralized exchange order book, and that's like the most efficient thing that you can think of. And mimicking that on chain is what UniV3 accomplished, and being able to make that more efficient is essentially all I can see happening for the near future. I never think we've hit kind of like a terminal velocity. I feel like there's always more that can be built, and there always will be more things coming. But I think, if we are looking for what's going to be the next big thing, I think just look at Uniswap and see what they do, because I think they're pretty close to releasing some new stuff as well.
And if I understood correctly, you're mixing the Solidly model with this concentrated liquidity model. And just curious, I know there's been like a lot of different Solidly forks on different chains. Is this typical of other Solidly forks, or is this something that differentiates Ramses?
Only the full range of concentrated liquidity involved. So I think Thena was the first to actually bring a sort of concentrated liquidity, but they kind of they made it very user friendly by wrapping it into using Gamma and algebra and kind of offloading a lot of the complexities to a third party, whereas we did everything in house. So we're not limited to any sort of ALM provider or any sort of we have zero limitation. So everything is done in house, and the actual concentrated liquidity is forked from Uniswap and modified, but everything else is completely unique and in house. Our gauge, so actually the part that has this integrated with the Solidly model is completely, we license that because there's so many, solidly forks around, and we really did not want to just kind of hand out some hard effort immediately. So we licensed it, so anyone who does take that, obviously, like they can, and if they did, they'd be discredited, because it really was not something simple to accomplish. The dev and manpower that was put into it was pretty substantial, and I think honestly, no one is going to be able to do it anytime soon properly, because it is not something that is easy at all, and on actual, like, to make it work, especially with boosts and stuff, because we try to retain as much as possible from the original solidly, because ultimately the original solidly was immutable. It didn't work out because there were some bugs found, and a lot of other drama, things like that. And then every model after that, none of them actually kept the original model, and no one ever saw if the actual original solidly model would work or not. And so we were like, hey, why wouldn't we just try and keep the original model as close as possible while keeping it modern? So with the boosts, I think we're one of the only V33 dexes that actually retain the boost, which, I mean, speaking to Andre himself, he even mentioned that the boost is absolutely fundamental to the entire model. So when the creator of something says it's absolutely fundamental, why would we try and kind of get rid of it? And I think it works very well with Curve and things like that, because the way I like to put it is solidly essentially was Andre took Curve, a lot from Curve, and he just translated it from Viper to Solidity, and then on top of that he mixed it in with the V33 model just 3.3 model of Olympus and rebases, while wrapping it all into a transferable NFT. And I think that's like the biggest difference between the solidly model and like what Curve and other dexes had done. Now we're taking it to the next step with the contra liquidity, with this we like to call it competitive farming, because the tighter your range is, the higher your emissions and fees. So in regular Unity V3, the tighter your emissions, the higher your fees, but there's no emissions and things like that. So you pair it with the 3.3 model and gauges, you can direct emissions towards it from voting, and then those who are fighting for providing the lowest slippage to swappers and the highest efficiency, they get rewarded the most. And ultimately that's where I think we're doing it, in my opinion, the best as far as any V33 is, simply because whereas relying on an ALM to choose a predefined range, we promote people to even do like a 1-tick range if they want to, and they'll earn higher rewards. There's obviously more risk in that, but we're giving people the full opportunity to build their positions however they want. We're not limiting them to any sort of third-party provider, things like that. So we want it to be fully flexible and future-proof. I think there's no reason to pigeonhole ourselves into some current model that we think works right now, but we'd rather be able to adapt and be modular to anything.
Yeah. One way that helps to look at it, because it is quite a complex system, is to look at it from the different participants and what their benefits are. So if we start with a partner who is trying to build liquidity, let's take Frax as an example. So Frax wants to deepen liquidity on Frax, and so they choose a 0.3% fee tier for Ramses CL, and then they they incentivize that particular fee tier. So then from their perspective, the epoch runs, they are able to they are voters themselves, and they're able to capture back a significant portion of that incentive that they've placed, and then they recycle that for the next week, right, or the next epoch. And that's really unique. It's especially pertinent for protocols that are trying to start from nothing. And big protocol established like Frax wins out in comparison with some of the other you could call it marketing initiatives to deepen liquidity that they are spending treasury resources or budget on. And so they continue to go, bigger with it. So from a partner standpoint, or a protocol that's trying to deepen liquidity, that's this benefit, is that they have this, we've turned an expense into an investment. Then if you move to the VRAM voters, they can come in and say, okay, FraxETH has incentivized, they put 5,000, on this 0.3% tier for FraxETH on Ramses CL. I'm going to vote for that. And now that voter, wherever along the band, like any trades that take place, they're getting the lion's share of those trading fees, and they're getting their portion of that incentive, that bribe that's been placed there. And they're getting a rebase on their voter position. And so for them, they're able to participate in the benefits of a superior, technology, with concentrated liquidity, which at the end of the day just equals, more efficiency and in their case, a higher, APR than where else they could be, spending their time and their resources. And then you go to the LPs, and for the LPs, they can come in and say, I want to supply for, FraxETH, and I'm going to now collect these RAM emissions that are being driven by the voters, and I'm also going to get a portion of these trading fees, and I can win big, because if I can provide the tightest, band, I'm going to be able to, beat the other LPs that I'm competing against, to take home, more of those fees than they are. So if you have these, and then of course on top of that is just traders, and low slippage and all the aggregators, being able to, and the whole system benefiting from all of this competition and this trifecta of interactivity. But that's how one way you can look at it is you have the protocols that are deepening liquidity and incentivizing. You have the voters, that are the VRAM holders, voting on certain pools and collecting all this, all the rewards. And then you have the LPs who have an opportunity, based on how it's set up, to really produce some significant APRs.
So in my day job, I work for More Money Finance. We're a stablecoin on the Avalanche chain. And currently we put, so you can trade between money in USDC and money in AVAX on 2 different dexes. So we're on Platypus, which is essentially like a single-sided liquidity version of Curve. And we are on the Trader Joe liquidity book. And we are still incentivizing through bribes on Platypus. But when we recently, so it's a very recent pool on Trader Joe, when we recently launched, we made decisions not to incentivize. And to see if the concentrated liquidity model there could be like powerful enough where as a protocol, we don't have to like give crazy emissions, where we're like debasing our own participants, the people who own our token, and have enough liquidity that's just generated by trading fees. So it's like a very early test for us. But I do think that like it seems that the space in general is heading in this direction, where hopefully in the future we find a way to have DEXs be so efficient that the liquidity can be paid for by just trading itself. Do you like what I'm talking about here in terms of efficiency? How does that fit with the Solidly model in general? How would the interaction there sort of work out, and how do you see that evolving?
Like on your expenditures, how do you think about, if we framed it as a marketing expense, how do you think about those incentives that you're spending from that standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I would still. I think when you're like launching something, it makes sense to spend on marketing. But if it's like an ongoing expense that is going to go on for the life of the project, I don't know. I think it's like over the long run unsustainable. I think as an industry, we're trying to find a way to just not naturally, like efficiency wins, right? So like naturally, the industry is trying to find a way to get a DEX that is so efficient that these emissions don't have to happen, because emissions hurt the, I hesitate to use the word shareholder, but the token holders for the project, right? So if we're thinking about crypto as a sustainable, usable, useful ecosystem, and not up only like gambling, I think we have to find a way to solve this problem.
Sure. And so when you and currently you're in a bootstrapping phase, right? And so when you spend X, how do you think what's the return on that investment for you? TVL?
I mean, I think there's like different metrics, right? Like, so it depends what we're trying to achieve at that point in time.
So I mean, the clear use case for protocols that are using Ramses is they want to build TVL. And so for them, it's, okay, if I, what is a sustainable incentive structure I can set up to where I'm able to place an incentive and then through voting power recapture on the weekly that incentive and just recycle it right back through. And the whole point being on the other end, what I'm getting is increased TVL, which has all the benefits that I need, for utility and for my project. That's the key difference. I think when you think about sustainability, that in a sense is the promise, and in some ways already the fulfillment with the V33 approach, is that the native token takes on the inflation, in our case RAM, so that the Fraxes and the Liquidities and the XCAD, all the protocols that are looking to build TVL, they don't experience that inflationary, negative of their tokens that they do on a traditional, in a traditional DEX. But some of the math, what you have to do is you have to invest, right? So you have to build your position over time so that you are able to capture your incentives on the weekly, recycle them, and just watch that TVL, and then be able to crunch the numbers and say, you know what, on a dollar invested basis, I'm getting the most efficient, TVL growth from Ramses compared to anywhere else in DeFi. And that desire and that mathing out, and partners who figured that out, if you watch them, how they behave is they grow their positions over time, and they make sure not to get diluted. And that in and of itself is what takes, then if you come back to the RAM token, which is not their primary interest, but it is an interest, the value there is that there is buy pressure as increasingly people want and see the value of holding strong voting positions, right, to drive emissions and recapture bribes, and or, if you're just a voter, to be able to get APRs by holding RAM. And so you buy it, you lock it, and you maintain your position over time, which, through the rebases, through just the system performing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this is, let's say like this. This is the issue we have seen historically since the Univ2 times when Sushi did the fork. Basically, this new DEX pays that volume by emitting. And we have seen that this is, this creates just on itself a really downward spiral for the DEX. So that's why I think
Netrim,
that
I
was
think you're muted
Andres.
if you're trying to speak.
Yeah, you're not listening. You're not hearing me. Hello, hello,
Yeah, I hear you.
hello.
I hear you great, Netrim.
Yeah, it
Wait,
sounds
Ah,
good.
okay,
I
okay,
guess just
Doug.
my side. I can't hear anything.
That's your issue.
My bad.
Okay. So I was saying, so these taxes, they get diluted, they get a downward spiral, and we have seen this with the UniV2 model because there have been a lot of them, and then we saw the UniV3, that's the Uniswap protocol with the ticks and the concentrated liquidity, and that's great, but Uni has a, let's say, misalignment between LP participants and token holders. Right now, remember, Uniswap V3 uh, doesn't stream any kind of revenue to the Uni token. So I think that's one of the, let's say, one of the biggest improvements, one of the biggest incentive alignment I have seen on the solidly model is the way that you can align those kind of incentive. You have your native token, which is an emission token, so naturally it will depreciate over time. But on the other side, you generate incentives that go towards not selling that emission. And that's what I'm seeing with Ramses and some other B33 models that we have seen. But I think we are good on that. I think everyone is understanding that part. So let's move to our next set of questions regarding decentralization. How is Ramses thinking decentralization right now? I know Ramses is right now upgradable. It's not immutable. We learned this on the original Solidly on Phantom. Immutable, bugs on the system, a lot of issues there. So I understand the initial push for having upgradable contracts. So what are you guys thinking for the future?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So our initially, yeah, as we're growing, we wanted to keep kind of the upgradable contracts because I mean we've had to do actually a ton of upgrades since we've started, and it's whether just to fix little minor things or add extra read functions to make it more adaptable for partners to integrate easier, things like that. Ultimately, it's just the original Solidly, there were so many bugs and issues that just could not have been fixed, and that was the ultimate problem that I think even Andre himself acknowledged was he shouldn't have made it completely immutable from the very beginning, even though that's what we all strive to do. But when you're really kind of pushing the boundaries and innovating, you don't want to rashly go out there without it being battle tested at first. So I think the biggest thing now is ensuring everything's battle tested before you kind of just give up the keys to the castle to the burn address and say, hey, we're decentralized, it's great. It's well, do you really want to put your users at risk? Do you value decentralization over being able to ensure that user funds are safe and that they're actually having a good experience? And I think there's that balance. So currently, yes, we are upgradable, but we do use a time lock. We do have methods to mitigate any sort of risk on us, so people don't really have to fully trust us. And if they don't trust us, they'll get a notification before we make any upgrade, and they can look through it. They have ample time to see what we're actually upgrading, what will be changed, and we try to let people know. But ultimately, yes, the plan is to essentially kind of go towards this curve model of an emergency council. So all the kind of partners we have that will be kind of representatives for their own community, and they would be the ultimate decision deciders of, okay, here's a proposed upgrade to the contracts. Our team has no actual ability to execute it by ourselves. We would need this emergency council to actually approve all these things, and they would actually be the signers themselves. So nothing would essentially go through without being checked and notified by everyone and their respective partners, because essentially we're protocol for protocols. So our user base is these protocols, and as a result, their users are kind of ends up being our users. So we want to cater to them, and we want to make sure they're always comfortable with what's being changed, and being modular and upgradable will allow us to do that. So we will keep the proxies, but as far as us having control, but we won't have control in the future. It'll be completely a emergency council, which you can view it as like a representative system. These people, if you're a Frax user, Frax, like the Frax team themselves, will be one of the signers in the emergency council. They'll be actually able to make that decision, like, hey, is this upgrade necessary? Do we approve this? Yes or no? And essentially decentralizing it through a representative standpoint, rather than have like tens of thousands of people being the ultimate decider if something gets upgraded. I think we want to be this total fully decentralized model and just the space in general, but we all know DAOs don't work. They're not proper yet. You can't make actual, like, there's some changes in models that cannot be done fully decentralized. There's certain limitations we have currently with the state of how the EVM and everything is. It doesn't mean that later on it won't be able to be fully trustless and decentralized. But currently, if you really want to be able to provide to the needs of all your constituents and people who are using your platform, you have to be very flexible and able to change things. And I think that's what an upgradable model does. But decentralizing that upgradable model is where you reach this kind of perfect medium, in my opinion, where no one has to rely on the team, but you rely on like 30 other projects that are involved in the actual platform. So you don't necessarily have to trust Ramses, but if you trust Frax, if you trust Liquidity, if you trust these other projects, then yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you don't trust them, or if you don't trust like the majority of all these other partner protocols, then ultimately I think there's a fundamental problem in the space, as far as we never did a good enough job of displaying kind of the trustworthiness of people. As much as we want to be a fully people don't have to be involved, like, we're human beings, people are always involved in every aspect of our lives. Even in a future decentralized model, people are going to be involved. Trust will always exist. It's not about completely getting rid of the trust. It's about mitigating that trust to the bare minimum and making it verifiable that any changes that are going to be made are not being done in bad faith. So I think we strongly, I personally strongly believe in decentralization, but I believe decentralization doesn't necessarily mean that there's zero human involvement and decision making in that regard. I feel like there completely has to be human intervention and reason for people to provide their input and common discourse and things like that. I think the biggest benefit of being a distributed model is the different viewpoints and cultures and things of everyone else kind of colliding together and trying to find this ideal debated medium that everyone can agree on. And so as long as there's technical limitations to being able to fully decentralize a model, I think the idea is to just mitigate the amount of responsibility and trust required to fully operate something in a quote-unquote decentralized manner.
Yeah, that's a very fair assumption, I think. Yeah, that decentralization and trustlessness, I think I didn't mangle that word. It works on a scale, so you keep working towards an objective, and I think it's very reasonable what you're saying, Doc. So we try to keep these things on the hour. We still have 9 minutes, but the idea is to also open up to the audience if anyone has questions for Doug or for North regarding Ramses. Meanwhile, while we wait, people just raise your hand, request to speak, and we will give it to you. No problem. Meanwhile, I wanted to touch base just on, I pronounce it, and sorry if I mangle the word, ENEAD, because it's the let's say the old tale, but I understand that that's not actually the English pronunciation for the protocol, but I have no idea how to say it.
Sounds good
So-
to me.
Yeah, you understand it, no? I know you do. Iliad, I have no idea how to pronounce it. Sorry, Aki, if you are listening. But I wanted to talk a bit about the composability behind Ramses. How are you guys working with the Ennead crew, the boosting that you were mentioning at the beginning, Doug?
Yeah. So I think that was one of the major things. Like we kept the boost, and that's inherited from Curve. I mean, Curve has convex, so essentially Ennead, you can view that as our convex layer. I think another good comparison is like Wombat. They have Wombex and Magpie, which are their convex layers. So Ennead is our convex layer, and we believe if you want like a fully, I guess, user-friendly model to extent, and when you have locking, especially with ours, we have 4-year locks. You want to have a system where people feel comfortable, locking their money or their funds for X amount of time, and having this sort of a convex type layer where we take it an extra step further, where you can actually turn that lock into a liquid wrap token, which then can be used in the Ennead ecosystem. And this is kind of inherited from, back in the original Solidity, there was 0x DAO and, SolidX, which those were the two kind of pioneers when it came to, I guess, the solidly convex layers. And, Ennead is built off of what was Monolith, which was built off of a combination of SolidX and Ox DAO. So essentially, I think, you get the best of both worlds, where you can kind of keep this boosted system where users, they don't necessarily have to even outside, I guess you'd call it mercenary capital, if you will, they can stake and get kind of boosted rewards without actually locking any tokens. And while you might be thinking, wait, you're just giving away like extra rewards to people who are mercenary, but the reality is the way the model works is there's a portion of the earned amount and performance fees and stuff that get actually locked and go towards users of the Ramses and Ennead ecosystem. So ultimately, even with this mercenary capital coming in, they're still benefiting the model in a way. They're increasing the lock rate, increasing the fees given to people. It's like a net benefit, I believe. And I think it's just very apparent. If you look at our lock rate, we have the highest lock rate out of any V3 model. And it just shows that it just keeps going up and it's sustainable because it's just, it's how it should be. I think when there's a locking model, the whole point is kind of scarcity and locking up as many tokens as possible, so the underlying float is less and it makes it more valuable and harder to acquire. And I think with this kind of a convex type layer, we have these huge I guess organizations kind of accumulating large positions. They are able to reduce the underlying circulating supply and float and make the ability to actually hold locks and things like that more valuable. So I think ultimately Ennead is just a great net positive to the ecosystem. And we've seen other, I guess you could call them competitors or whatever, they see how successful Ennead is and how great the model is, and they've even asked for them to come and try and build stuff for them. Even though they don't have the boosted system, they just see the value in like the vote optimization and just kind of this simplified user interface that's done through this convex type layer. So I think ultimately it's one of the better things that exists in the model, and I'm kind of sad that it's been kind of forgotten in these other similar type solidly models. Is they just got rid of boost. They didn't think it was necessary, but why would it not be? Like you have to have some incentive for people. Like if people are just LPing and dumping your tokens, like they're not really giving any benefit to your ecosystem. Whereas with this boost model, those who are actually willing to lock tokens and help the protocol, they will earn more rewards. So you provide this benefit to people who lock, rather than promoting people who are LPing to give them higher rewards, which frankly is a negative feedback loop and doesn't make any sense. And I think some people have opted to do that, and I don't think they truly understand how the model works. Whereas, we've been around since day one. We know exactly how the model works. We've seen it play out in so many different ways. And this ultimately is how it should be. and I think it's very apparent in our lock rate.
Yeah, you have WETH rewards just on the WETH side. I mean, the total APR for holding, a NEAD RAM position right now is close to, up over 300%. But even the WETH rewards alone, are 89, 90. They've been up over 100%. That's tough to beat.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, North. So we are coming up on the hour. I think we covered a lot. I don't know if anyone has any question. If not, we can wrap it up. Please don't be shy. If anyone has questions, just request to speak.
Yeah, I think this was a really good space. Thank you guys for coming on and sharing your project and your views on the space.
Yeah, thank you both, Doug and North, for coming and being with us.
Thanks for having us anytime. I mean, it's always fun to chat with you and this and other venues, and so happy to jump on and talk about any topics. It doesn't have to be Ramses. Anything we can be value add or participate in, we'd love to do it with you. This is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, would be super happy to do a follow-up. That'd be great. And to anyone who is watching on YouTube or on Twitter broadcasts or rewatching the space, if you want to help out our channel, we just started doing this, so we really just started putting attention to our Twitter account. Please follow us on Twitter. That'd be great.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks all.
Otherwise, we'll just close it down. Thanks a lot, guys. See you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.